What if you could walk into any room and instantly see the hidden script people are acting from, their fears, their priorities, and the tiny, repeatable behaviors that give them away? This audio guide will teach you a practical toolkit drawn from psychology, body language, social skills, and personality types, so you stop guessing and start knowing enough to act wisely. Each minute hands you one testable skill, a micro-observation, a short conversational probe, or a behavioral experiment you can run the same day. Listen closely and you will leave with no mysticism, only repeatable methods that turn human noise into clear signals and better decisions. Chapter 1. The Practical Psychology of First Impressions. What the brain registers. In second, first impressions are not magic. They are fast, patterned computations the human brain performs to reduce uncertainty. This chapter reframes first impressions as predictable signal processing rather than mysterious intuition, and gives you a reproducible method to make them more accurate and less misleading. The mind samples a small set of cues: face, posture, voice, timbre, grooming, and micro-behaviors, and blends them with context to produce an immediate hypothesis about warmth and competence. Warmth answers the question, will this person help or harm me? Competence answers, can they execute? These two axes drive most social decisions. The practical move is not to eliminate rapid judgment, that is impossible, but to convert that automatic output into a disciplined hypothesis you can test. Start with a simple 3-step protocol for the first 90 seconds. Observe, note, delay. Observe without narrating, register dress, eye contact pattern, handshake firmness, breathing rhythm, and opening phrasing. Note only facts, not interpretations. For example, record that the handshake was brief and wrists turned inward, rather than concluding the person is rude. Delay your decision until you gather 2 more data points in the first 5 minutes: how they handle a small request and how they respond to a minor surprise. People who adjust quickly tend to be adaptable. Those who rigidly repeat a first line often reveal rehearsed persona rather than situational fit. Another critical element is context calibration. A person in a high-stakes interview will often present differently than in an informal coffee. Weight the situation when reading signals. Use a default skepticism multiplier. Treat the initial read as 60% provisional and ask a concise follow-up question that tests the warmth or competence signal without threatening rapport. What do you consider the most important part of this role? The answer and the micro-behaviors around it. Small smile, relaxed shoulders, specific examples serve as rapid corroboration. Finally, manage your own presentation deliberately, because first impressions are bidirectional. Use open posture, measured pace, and a brief concrete claim about intent to reduce ambiguity for the other person. First impressions become useful when treated as working models to be verified quickly through structured probes rather than as immutable truths. This disciplined approach reduces costly misreads and improves the speed and quality of early decisions in hiring, sales, and networking. Chapter 2. Body language as probabilistic clues: posture, gesture, and proximity. Body language is a rich informational channel, but it is not a deterministic code. This chapter teaches a probabilistic approach. Treat posture, gesture, and proximity as weighted clues that shift likelihoods rather than as categorical signals. Begin with posture as baseline. An open chest and relaxed shoulders often index comfort and willingness to engage. A tightened chest or retracted shoulders may signal guardedness or stress. But baseline requires context. Someone leaning back in a hot room may simply be cooling off. Gesture speed and amplitude reveal tempo and cognitive load. Rapid, expansive gestures often accompany high arousal, either excitement or nervousness, while small, constrained gestures can signal control or suppression. The key is multimodal corroboration. If fast gestures pair with narrowed eyes and clipped sentences, the pattern points to agitation. If they pair with broad smiles and wide-open posture, it indicates enthusiasm. Proximity and orientation are social grammar. Who moves into whose space and who aligns torso and feet toward whom? Orientation is especially diagnostic because feet often reveal true interest before the mouth does. Practical techniques include the micro-test. After noticing a gesture shift, ask a short, neutral question. How would you prioritize these options? And watch whether gesture amplitude reduces, stabilizes, or increases. A calming of gestures after a clear question indicates the person found a resolvable focal point. An increase suggests continued internal conflict. Also track synchrony. People who unconsciously mirror each other are often building rapport and alignment. Lack of synchrony is not automatically hostility, but signals either unfamiliarity or a different conversational rhythm. Use proxemic adjustments strategically. Move slightly to the side to reduce confrontation when you seek candid feedback, or close a bit in a collaborative setting to invite intimacy. Above all, record and test your interpretations. Body language sharpens when you validate it across multiple interactions rather than treating a single posture as a definitive statement about character. Chapter 3. Micro-expressions and facial leakage. Short flashes, big clues. Facial micro-expressions are brief, involuntary flashes that provide windows into immediate emotional reactions. This chapter explains how to spot and use them ethically and accurately. Micro-expressions last a fraction of a second and often reveal primal responses: surprise, disgust, fear, anger, joy, sadness, or contempt before conscious recomposure occurs. They are most valuable when they disrupt an ongoing expression. A quick tightening at the corner of the mouth when someone praises a plan suggests reservation despite verbal endorsement. The practical skill is not to read a single micro-expression as a verdict, but to use it as a prompt for low-threat inquiry. Sequence matters. Notice the flash. Allow 2 to 3 seconds to see whether a recovery smile appears. Then ask a narrow question about the subject that likely triggered the feeling. Avoid labeling the emotion aloud. Instead, use behavioral probes that let the person clarify. Could you tell me what concern might make that plan risky from your view? This approach converts a fleeting image into actionable information without public shaming. Improve accuracy by cross-checking with voice and language cues. The micro-expression paired with a slight pitch rise and hedge words increases the chance the emotion is authentic. Train with practice video. Short clips at reduced speed help you learn what genuine micro-expressions look like versus deliberate signaling. Also be mindful of facial idiosyncrasies. Some people have micro-movements unrelated to affect due to habit or muscular tension. The ethical boundary is crucial. Micro-expression detection should inform curiosity, not manipulation. Use these insights to deepen understanding, design supportive questions, and adjust timing, not to entrap or expose someone unexpectedly. When used responsibly, Micro-expression awareness reduces miscommunication because it alerts you to misalignments between what is said and how it is felt, giving you the opportunity to bridge the gap before relationships harden around unresolved doubts. Chapter 4. Voice, Rhythm, and Linguistic Style. Listening to how people say things. The spoken word includes continuous information beyond semantic content. This chapter focuses on voice qualities, pitch, cadence, tempo, and rhythm, and how they combine with linguistic style to reveal cognitive and emotional states. Pitch variability indicates emotional engagement. A flat pitch across content suggests detachment or rehearsed script. Cadence, how fast someone speaks, tracks either cognitive fluency or anxiety. Rapid cadence with frequent repairs signals load. Slow cadence with long pauses often indicates deliberation or difficulty retrieving specifics. Rhythm and pause placement mark emphasis and processing. Deliberate pauses before key points often serve rhetorical weight, while sudden hesitations can mark disfluency. Combine these voice signals with linguistic markers, hedges, I think maybe, absolutes, always, never, and distancing language, people, they, to infer certainty and ownership. For instance, high frequency of hedges plus soft tone suggests tentative belief, while decisive verbs and low hedging predict stronger commitment. Chapter 5. Social Skills and Small Talk. As diagnostic. Tools, what casual exchange reveals. Small talk is not trivial. It functions as a low-risk diagnostic instrument that reveals priorities, boundaries, and social calibration. This chapter reframes casual exchange as structured data. People reveal identity cues, work role, habits, values, through what they mention spontaneously. The events they prioritize, the names they drop, the problems they find funny or infuriating. The technique is to use small talk intentionally. Deploy 3 micro-questions early. What was a highlight of your week? Who do you usually rely on for quick advice? And what's a recurring small headache in your work? These queries produce rapid, honest signals because they are concrete and grounded in personal experience rather than abstract opinion. Also listen for conversational ownership. Do they ask reciprocal questions, or do they talk primarily about themselves? High conversational reciprocity indicates social calibration and empathy. Persistent self-focus often signals stress, high workload, or narcissistic orientation. Chapter 6. Personality Frameworks as Practical Lenses, Not Labels. Personality typologies, Big 5 traits, temperamental archetypes, or MBTI-like styles, are useful heuristics but dangerous when applied as rigid labels. This chapter advises using personality frameworks as lenses to form tentative hypotheses about preference and likely behavior, and then testing those hypotheses with small experiments. For example, a high conscientiousness hypothesis predicts strong planning habits. Test it by proposing a short timeline and seeing whether the person offers detailed milestones. An extroversion hypothesis predicts quick social engagement. Test it with an invitation to a brief group brainstorming session. Avoid reifying categories. People occupy spectra and behave differently across roles and contexts. The practical method is a 3-step cycle: hypothesize, test, update. Start with a lightweight profile. Preferred decision tempo, fast, slow, social energy, high-low, and information style, narrative, chart data. Run 1 micro-test per dimension. Offer choices that favor speed versus deliberation, invite to a short social exchange, or present data-heavy versus story-driven evidence. and observe behavior and effect. Use the results to design communication strategies and task allocations that fit the person's actual preferences rather than an assumed type. Also track stability. Some traits are stable across months, others shift with stress or role change. Regular short retests prevent obsolete profiling and respect human plasticity. Framing personality as provisional improves accuracy, preserves dignity, and enhances collaboration because it prioritizes functional adaptation over pigeonholing. Chapter 7. Influence and Persuasion. Ethics, How to Shape. Outcomes without manipulating. Influence is a toolkit. Ethics determine whether it serves collective benefit or private extraction. This chapter sets pragmatic boundaries for persuasive techniques drawn from psychology, reciprocity, social proof, scarcity, consistency, and shows how to apply them transparently and respectfully. Reciprocity works when you offer genuine, useful help first and keep subsequent asks modest and specific. Social proof is ethical when you present real examples rather than curated testimonials meant to deceive. Scarcity is legitimate when temporal constraints are factual, not manufactured. Consistency leverages the human desire to align actions with public commitments. Use it by asking for small initial agreements that build into larger collaboration, ensuring each step genuinely adds value. The operative rule is consent and reversibility. Every influence move should leave a clear and reversible option for the other party. For example, when seeking commitment, offer a pilot with an easy exit clause rather than an ultimatum. Transparency increases long-term trust. Explain why you propose a change, and invite correction rather than framing persuasion as a stealthy conversion. Monitor effects, track whether influence yields mutual benefit or merely shifts burden to others. If harm appears, stop and adjust. Ethical influence preserves autonomy, reduces exploitation, and produces durable cooperation that outperforms one-off wins achieved through manipulation. Chapter 8. Negotiation Techniques, informed by psychological signals. Negotiation succeeds when you combine signal reading with structural design, identify priorities, reduce fear of loss, and create reversible tests. Start by using opening probes that reveal whether the counterpart values certainty, speed, or relationships most. Ask if we could prioritize one dimension which would matter most to you, time or scope. Listen to vocal and micro-behavioral cues when they answer. A quick, bright response signals clarity, while hedging and pitch shifts indicate internal trade-offs. Use conditional offers to lower perceived risk. If you provide X, will you consider Y? This converts demands into explicit trade-offs and clarifies leverage. Apply anchoring responsibly. Set an initial frame that reflects reality-based options, rather than extreme positions meant to coerce concessions. Test offers with small commitments. Propose a pilot phase with measurable metrics and a short review window. Observe reaction. Relief suggests fear of long-term entanglement. Resistance suggests perceived loss. Reserve hard deadlines for genuine constraints and avoid manufactured scarcity, which damages trust. The integrative aim is to expand the pie, uncover hidden preferences that allow value creation rather than pure positional bargaining. Use read signals, tone softening, micro-smiles, pacing to time concessions and secure durable agreements. Negotiation informed by psychology is iterative, evidence-driven, and oriented toward options that remain reversible and fair. Chapter 9. Conflict, de-escalation and repair, tactical moves that restore function. Conflict is a signal that preferences or facts are misaligned. Repair requires reducing threat and restoring agency. This chapter provides a tactical sequence: pause, label, validate, and propose a test. Pause removes escalation fuel. A single deep breath or brief silence lets arousal drop. Label the emotion succinctly. I hear frustration about the timeline, so the other person feels understood. Validation does not mean agreement. It means acknowledging the experience. I can see why that would be stressful, and it lowers defensive posture. Then propose a concrete small test to rebuild shared facts. A 1-week pilot with daily 5-minute check-ins or a short data pull on the disputed metric. Tests are evidence-generating actions that shift the conversation from blame to problem-solving. Use private repair steps when status is involved. Public corrections escalate. Also institute cooling agreements, explicit norms for how to postpone a heated topic, and return within a bounded time frame. Track repair outcomes and celebrate small restored capabilities. Effective conflict repair is rapid, proportional, and oriented toward restoring predictable function rather than scoring moral victories. Chapter 10. Putting it together. A practical framework for ethical people analysis. This final chapter of the first 10 constructs an integrative framework you can apply immediately. Establish baseline, form provisional hypotheses, run small reversible tests, and update your model while preserving dignity and consent. Begin every new relationship with a short calibration phase. Ask 3 low-cost questions and run 1 micro-test within the first week. Maintain a lightweight ledger: observed facts, hypothesis, test, and outcome. Use the ledger to prevent confirmation bias and to institutionalize learning. Always apply ethical filters. Is the information necessary? Is the test reversible? And have we obtained consent where appropriate? Design communications and proposals that fit observed preferences for tempo and information style. And use influence techniques only with transparency and exit options. Embed repair rituals in your interactions so conflicts are opportunities to learn rather than permanent ruptures. This procedural approach turns people analysis from impressionistic guessing into a repeatable, humane method for better decisions and stronger relationships. Practice it deliberately and regularly. The skill improves most rapidly with short cycles of observation, testing, and honest feedback. Chapter 11. Emotional Intelligence. Applied: reading and responding to inner states. Emotional intelligence is the practical engine behind accurate people reading because it translates observable signals into adaptive responses that preserve dignity and produce outcomes. This chapter begins with a simple but powerful operating assumption. Internal states drive behavior, and those states can be stabilized or amplified by how you respond. The most reliable route to competence is not guessing someone's feeling and asserting it as fact, but using modest, emotionally attuned moves that invite correction and cooperation. Start with the 3-layer scan. Layer 1 is raw affect, visible facial tone, voice coloration, and immediate posture changes. Layer 2 is appraisals, the cognitive framing you can infer from language: threat, loss, opportunity, pride. Layer 3 is behavioral impulse, the action tendencies often accompanying states: withdrawal, attack, appease, or engagement. Train the habit of moving through the layers quickly. Observe the micro-affect. Translate to a tentative appraisal internally and then choose a micro-response that aims to regulate the behavioral impulse. For instance, when a team member's voice tightens and their shoulders constrict after you announce a new deadline, the raw signal likely maps to threat appraisal and a withdrawal impulse. The regulation move is a short, restoring script that names the observation neutrally and offers a contained option. I noticed the timeline felt tight. Would it help if we prioritized 2 deliverables first and leave the rest for phase 2? That phrasing reduces threat by offering procedural control rather than moral judgment. A second core skill is attunement without absorption. Emotional intelligence involves resonating enough to build trust, but not absorbing the other person's arousal so you lose capacity. Practice a 2-second internal grounding breath before you mirror tone or reflect content. This micro-break prevents emotional contagion and allows you to choose whether to mirror warmth or to lower arousal. Third, use calibration probes to test private inferences. When the appraisal is that a person feels unseen, common in remote work contexts, test rather than declare which of these 2 options would signal better support, a weekly check-in, or a shared progress note. A choice reveals priorities and reduces the burdensome need to be right about feelings. Fourth, prioritize regulatory moves that change the environment rather than only the words. Chapter 12, Advanced Body Language, Hands, Feet, Microgestures, and the Dynamics of Movement. Beyond posture and facial cues, hands, feet, and microgestures carry high bandwidth information because they are less consciously curated and therefore often leak true priorities and intentions. This chapter unpacks practical heuristics for reading these subtler channels and turning them into small, reversible tests. Begin with the hands. Hands reveal action orientation and cognitive framing. Open palms presented with fingers relaxed, typically, signal openness and cooperative intent. Tightly clasped hands pressed together at chest level often indicate internal problem-solving or containment of emotion. Gestural economy matters. Over-gesturing when making precise claims is sometimes a compensatory mechanism for uncertain content, whereas sparse hands paired with concrete nouns often implies practiced competence. Watch for pacing of gestures. Rapid, repetitive hand flicks can signal anxiety or an attempt to regulate arousal. Slowing gestures by pausing and asking a clarifying question tends to reduce the motor pattern if the issue is nervousness. Next, observe feet and lower body orientation. People's feet often betray true interest faster than the face. When in conversation, the direction of the feet pointing toward or away shows motivation. Feet orienting toward an exit or another person usually indicate a readiness to disengage or redirect. Small foot shifts after a proposal often predict whether someone is inclined to accept or decline before they speak. Note also leg tension. Crossed legs with the outer knee locked can indicate guardedness, while an open lower body with occasional grounding shifts suggests receptivity. Micro-gestures, subtle actions under a second, are particularly diagnostic because they bypass deliberative censorship. A brief thumb rub against the index finger, a fleeting swallow, or a stealthy face touch right after a claim often index cognitive load or discomfort. Use micro-gestures as probabilistic prompts rather than verdicts. When a micro-gesture aligns with hedged language and a shift in pitch, treat the cluster as a sign to slow down the interaction and offer a small safety valve, such as a clarifying restatement or a conditional proposal. Movement dynamics, the tempo and flow of motion, tells you about tempo preference and decision inertia. People who move in quick accelerations prefer fast cycles and iterative feedback. Those with measured, deliberate motion favor long windows for reflection and precision. Match your tactical proposal to these tempos. Offer a short pilot to the quick mover and a detailed phased plan to the deliberate mover. Importantly, reading movement must be paired with context checks. A person fidgeting with hands in a hot room may be thermally regulated rather than anxious. Run a small environmental probe, adjust seating or suggest a brief stand and walk, and observe whether micro-gestures settle. If they do, the origin was situational. Ethical use requires not exposing someone by naming an involuntary gesture publicly. Instead, convert signals into private procedural fixes or curiosity-led probes. For example, if feet angle away and voice tightens rather than accusing, ask quietly whether there's a timing concern and offer 2 alternative timelines. That preserves dignity and produces clear data. Finally, build micro-habit practice. Watch short footage of mundane conversations and annotate hands, feet, and microgestures. Then compare your annotations to outcomes. Over weeks, your sensitivity sharpens and your interventions become tighter and more humane. Advanced body language is less about dramatic reveals and more about pattern recognition that enables subtle, early interventions to keep conversations productive and relationships intact. Chapter 13. Personality integration in practice, using typologies to design. Communication and influence strategies. Personality frameworks, when used as flexible lenses rather than rigid categories, help you design interaction strategies that fit how people prefer to think, decide, and be persuaded. This chapter presents a pragmatic integration method. Treat typologies as vectors of probable preference across 3 dimensions: decision tempo, fast to slow, social energy, high to low, and evidence style, narrative to data, and then map tactical moves onto that 3-dimensional space. Begin by constructing a minimal profile from early interactions using quick tests. Offer a forced choice between speed and perfection to reveal tempo preference. Invite a short social exchange or propose a quiet one-on-one to gauge social energy. Present a brief narrative example versus a fact sheet to see which elicits more engagement and specificity. These tests are low cost and reversible, yet produce actionable orientation. Once you have a profile, customize your approach for a fast tempo, high social energy, narrative-preferring person. Frame proposals as brief stories with immediate action steps and a clear social endorsement. Use open invitations to co-create because they like momentum and relational input. Chapter 14. Advanced influence sequences. Designing ethical nudges. That work. Influence is most reliable when it is architected as a short sequence of steps that respect autonomy, reveal information gradually, and make desirable choices easy and reversible. This chapter presents a repeatable design pattern you can use whenever you want to shift behavior without coercion. Clarify the objective, map the choice architecture, create an ethical nudge sequence, test with micro-experiments, and monitor for harm. Start by being brutally precise about the objective. Replace vague language like get buy-in with a measurable outcome, a signed pilot agreement, 3 people attending a trial session, or a completed survey within 7 days. Precise objectives let you judge the nudge's effectiveness and detect unintended side effects quickly. Next, map the choice architecture. What options do people currently see? What friction keeps them from choosing the option you prefer? and which defaults are in place. Defaults are powerful. Changing the default from opt-in to opt-out increases uptake, but also raises ethical stakes. For ethically defensible defaults, ensure reversibility and explicit consent are easy and visible. With the architecture mapped, design a short ethical nudge sequence comprised of small, transparent steps that lower cognitive load and preserve choice. An effective sequence often contains an informational primer, a low-cost initial commitment, a visible social proof moment, and a simple escalation for those who want more. For example, to increase participation in a workplace mentorship program, begin with a one-page primer explaining benefits and time commitment. Follow with an invitation to a 30-minute exploratory session, low-cost commitment. Highlight early volunteer mentors with short testimonials, social proof, and offer a clear calendar button that signs someone up with 2 clicks and an easy opt-out link. Chapter 15. Designing teams with personality vectors, from conflict to complement. Teams perform best when individual differences are intentionally converted from friction into complementary roles. This chapter provides a practical method to design team composition and workflow using the personality vector model introduced earlier: decision tempo, social energy, and evidence preference, and shows how to convert those vectors into actionable role assignments, meeting practices, and conflict-reducing structures. Begin with a quick mapping exercise for each team member. Using short, low-cost probes, determine whether they prefer faster versus slower decision tempo, whether they gain energy from social interaction or prefer solitude, and whether they respond better to narrative examples or data-driven summaries. Collect this information through 3 simple moves: offer a forced choice tempo scenario, invite a short, collaborative microtask, and present a 1-page data memo versus a 2-minute story. Record the resulting vectors in a concise 1-line profile for each person. Chapter 16. Leadership, Presence, and the Physiology of Influence. Leadership presence is fundamentally embodied. People sense it before they can articulate it, and that sensing is the product of specific, trainable physiological patterns combined with clear behavioral design. This chapter translates the abstract idea of presence into concrete practices you can rehearse: breath regulation, paced movement, vocal anchoring, micro-rituals for composure, and environmental framing to amplify your intended message. Start with breath regulation because it is the fastest lever. Under stress, breath becomes shallow and fast, which raises pitch and narrows cognitive bandwidth. Practice a 2-minute breathing protocol you can deploy before any high-stakes interaction. Inhale for 4 counts, hold 2, exhale for 6, repeat 8 times while releasing tension from shoulders and jaw. This down regulates the sympathetic nervous system and stabilizes voice pitch. Combine breath work with a simple posture ritual. Before entering a room, stand for 30 seconds with feet hip-width apart, shoulders back but relaxed, and hands comfortably at the sides. This physical set point signals readiness to your body and to observers. People read posture as a proxy for confidence. Vocal anchoring is next. Presence depends on steady, lower register delivery rather than volume. Practice shortening sentences into crisp claims with a deliberate pause after each claim. Pauses function as rhetorical amplifiers and let listeners process. Record 3 core sentences you often need to deliver: vision statement, key priority, closing ask, and rehearse them with measured cadence. until they sit comfortably in your breath pattern. Chapter 17. Cultural Fluency and Contextual Translation. Reading people. Across worlds. Reading people well is impossible without cultural humility, because the same bodily rhythm, gesture, or conversational move will carry radically different meanings across contexts, languages, institutions, and subcultures. This chapter makes cultural fluency practical by turning it into a short, repeatable diagnostic and translation practice you can use before making any strong interpersonal inference. Start by reframing your initial read as culturally situated rather than universal. Assume that any surprising cue has at least 3 plausible cultural interpretations, and that your job is to surface which one fits the present context. The everyday workflow begins with a micro-mapping routine you run in the first 5 minutes of a cross-cultural interaction. Map observable markers, language register, formality of address, proxemic distances, use of silence, dress codes, and the presence or absence of small ritual behaviors like gift-giving or formulaic politeness. These markers create a rough cultural frame. Next, use 2 short, curiosity-driven probes to test the frame. Probe 1 is a contextual question about norms. How do people typically prefer to receive feedback here? Probe 2 is a procedural microtest. Offer 2 interaction styles, brief, direct suggestion versus a soft, story-based alternative, and watch which style reduces tension and which invites elaboration. These quick tests collapse ambiguity because they generate behavioral responses that reveal preferred interaction models far more reliably than speculative interpretation. Beyond immediate signals, pay attention to value vectors that vary across cultures. Time orientation, punctuality versus relational pacing, face management, directness versus indirectness in criticizing, agency, individual responsibility versus collective decision-making, and power distance, egalitarian versus hierarchical norms. Convert each vector into a small design rule for your next move. For example, in high power distance contexts, route sensitive feedback through a trusted intermediary rather than public confrontation. In relationship-first cultures, spend extra time on rapport before moving to decisions. Importantly, culture is not monolithic. Organizational subcultures, professional norms, and generational differences overlay national culture. Use layered triangulation, combine national norms with sectoral signals, tech startups versus public institutions, and with micro-community cues such as local language idioms or inside jokes. When ambiguity remains, default to a preserving posture. Ask a permission question before making an interpretive statement. May I check my understanding of how decisions usually get made here? And offer an easily reversible pathway if your read is off. Finally, build a short cultural archive for recurring contexts. After each cross-cultural engagement, record 3 quick lines: what looked different, what probe you ran, and what worked. Over months, this lightweight ethnography becomes a practical library that reduces costly misreads. Cultural fluency is not about mastering all meanings. It is about installing a disciplined habit of translation. Observe, test, adapt, and archive. This keeps your curiosity active, your interventions respectful, and your ability to predict behavior calibrated to the realities of the people and places you actually meet. Chapter 18. Longitudinal change and the dynamics of character. Predicting who will grow and who will stall. People are not static. They change in response to role demands, stresses, learning opportunities, and deliberate practice. This chapter focuses on the practical difference between surface behavior and durable change and gives you an evidence-based method to forecast who will grow when elevated into new responsibilities and who is likely to plateau. The core premise is that change reveals itself in three nested signals: micro-behaviors that indicate curiosity and error correction, meta-behaviors that reveal learning infrastructure, and relational patterns that show whether the person attracts or resists developmental scaffolding. Micro-behaviors are the earliest and most predictive signs. Do they solicit specific feedback after a mistake? Do they implement small corrections? And do they reflect on outcomes with factual, non-avoidant language? People who habitually convert failures into tiny corrective experiments are learning machines. Their subsequent role expansion is higher probability. Meta-behaviors are structural practices that support growth. Consistent journaling, scheduled reflection meetings with mentors, and a habit of breaking projects into measurable experiments. These are not glamorous, but they scale learning because they create observable evidence trails. Relational patterns matter because growth rarely happens in isolation. Does the person form alliances that supply honest feedback? Do they create upward and lateral accountability loops? People who build feedback channels, mentors, peers, subordinate reports, create social scaffolding that magnifies small learning acts into durable capability. To forecast growth, run a short, low-cost developmental test. Assign a time-bound stretch task with clear metrics and a built-in feedback cadence. Then observe the three signals across weeks. Evaluate whether the person seeks data, applies small corrections, and engages support systems. Rate each dimension on a simple scale and combine them into a composite growth probability. Use the composite to shape role decisions. High micro-behavior plus strong meta-behavior plus integrated relational scaffolding equals good candidate for rapid expansion. Missing any of these elements suggests either a need for developmental scaffolding or a higher risk of stall. Also, watch for deceptive growth signals. Occasionally, someone will perform well under observation, but lacks the meta-behaviors to maintain change after oversight fades. That pattern, performance-shaped, to demonstrate competence but without internalized habits, predicts relapse when autonomy increases. Finally, design growth-friendly environments, provide structured reflection protocols, mandate small pilot projects where failure is expected and learning is rewarded, and normalize public sharing of lessons learned. Growth then becomes a systemic property of the organization rather than a lottery of charismatic individuals. Predicting change is not prophecy. It is pattern recognition grounded in the presence of curiosity, practice scaffolding, and social accountability. Chapter 19, When People Reading Must Bow to Ethics, Privacy, Consent, and Repair. The craft of analyzing people scales into institutional power quickly, which creates ethical obligations that cannot be sidestepped. This chapter operationalizes ethics into three enforceable practices: consent, first observation, minimal necessary inference, and mandated repair protocols. Consent first observation reframes even subtle behavioral profiling as a domain requiring permission when it moves beyond everyday conversational sensitivity into stored profiles or consequential decisions. The practical rule is simple. If your observation will be recorded, shared, or used to make a consequential decision, hiring, promotion, resource, allocation, obtain consent and explain how insights will be used and how they can be contested. Minimal necessary inference limits inference to the data strictly required for the task at hand. Chapter 20. Implementation. Playbook. From individual skill to team practice. The final chapter turns the craft into runnable routines you can start using this week. The playbook organizes practices into 3 layers: individual micro-habits, team rituals, and institutional protocols, each with specific templates and timelines for deployment. Individual micro-habits are lightweight daily drills, a 2-minute baseline calibration before each important interaction, a 1-line post-meeting micro-note, 3 facts, 1 follow-up, and a weekly 10-minute pattern review where you update one person's behavioral ledger. These short cycles create reliable evidence without massive time investment. Team rituals scale the practice collaboratively. Institute a weekly 5-minute signal sync where team members share one observed pattern that affected a project and one proposed small test to resolve it. Run monthly micro-experiment syncs where short pilots are reported and lessons distilled into one actionable change, and require decision templates for hires and promotions that include a people read evidence line plus a short pilot plan. Institutional protocols protect scale, adopt consent templates for behavioral pilots, designate an ethical steward to oversee sensitive profiles, and create an outcomes register where early predictions and actual results are compared at 3 and 6 months. The playbook includes concrete templates, the 1-line post-meeting note, the 3-question pilot brief, and the 2-question consent script, so teams can implement without heavy design work. Conclusion. From skill to stewardship. Practicing people analysis with humility and rigor. The practical study of people is a high-leverage skill that amplifies both outcomes and responsibility. The roadmap in this book moves from quick observational habits to complex institutional designs, but the through line is constant. Observe with curiosity, test with small reversible experiments, adapt with evidence, and protect dignity with clear ethical guardrails. Mastery is not a single trait, but a disciplined set of micro-habits integrated into teams and systems that reward learning and repair. Your daily practice should be modest, baseline before you judge, run one small test when ambiguous, record one factual note after each key interaction, and schedule a short reflective review weekly.